Hello friends, welcome back to Lutuf's Literary Club and welcome to another important video in the series on history of English literature. In my last video, I discussed the Restoration period, its political background, its social background and its literature. Mostly we focused on poetry and drama. In this video, we shall discuss in the continuity of the previous video the 18th century literature. The 18th century in England is called the Classical Age or the Augustan Age in literature. It is also called the Age of Good Sense or the Age of Reason or the Age of Sensibility. Though Dryden belonged to the 17th century, he is also included in the Classical or Augustine Age, as during his time the characteristics of his age had manifested themselves and he himself represented them to a great extent. Other great literary figures who dominated this age successively were Pope and Dr. Johnson, and so the classical age is divided into three distinct periods: the age of Dryden, the age of Pope, and the age of Dr. Johnson. In this short video, which is devoted to the 18th century literature in England, I'll deal with the ages of Pope and Johnson. The age of Dryden has already been dealt with in the preceding video entitled The Restoration Period or Restoration Literature. The 18th century is called the Classical Age in English literature on account of three reasons. In the first place, the term classic refers in general applies to writers of the highest rank in any nation. This term was applied to the works of the Greek and Roman writers like Homer and Virgil. As the writers of the 18th century in England tried to follow the simple and noble methods of the great ancient writers, they began to be called the classical writers. In the second place, in every national literature, there is a period when a large number of writers produce works of great merit. Such a period is often called the classical period or age. For example, the reign of Augustus is called the classical age of Rome, and the age of Dante is called the classical age of Italian literature. As during the 18th century in England, there was an abundance of literary productions. The critics named it the classical age in English literature. In the third place, during this period, the English writers rebelled against the exaggerated and fantastic style of writing prevalent during the Elizabethan and Puritan ages, and they demanded that poetry, drama, and prose should follow exact rules. In this, they were influenced by French writers, especially by Boileau and Rapin, who insisted on precise methods of writing poetry and who professed to have discovered their rules in the classics of Horace and Aristotle. The 18th century is called the Classical Age because the writers followed the classicism of the ancient writers, which was taken in a narrow sense to imply fine polish and external elegance. But as the 18th century writers in England followed the ancient classical writers only in their external performance and lacked their sublimity and grandeur, their classicism is called pseudo-classicism or false classicism. As the term classical age is therefore too dignified for writers of the 18th century in England who imitated only the outward trapping of the ancient classical writers and could not get at their inner spirit, this age is preferably called the Augustan Age. This term was chosen by the writers of the 18th century themselves, who saw in Pope, Addison, Swift, Johnson and book the modern parallels to Horace, Virgil, Cicero, and other brilliant writers who made Roman literature famous during the reign of Emperor Augustus. Of course, to term this as the Augustan Age is also not justified because the writers of this period could not compare favorable with those of the Augustan age in Latin literature. But these terms, the classical age and the Augustan age, have become current, and so this age is generally called by these terms. The 18th century is also called the Age of Reason or the Age of Good Sense or the Age of Sensibility because the people thought that they could stand on their own legs and be guided in the conduct of their affairs by the light of their own reason, unclouded by respect for ancient precedent. They began to think that undue respect for authority of the ancients was a great source of error, and therefore in every matter man should apply his own reason and common sense. Even in the literature where the prospect for classical art forms and the rules for writing in those forms gave the defenders of the ancients a decided advantages, critics could declare that the validity of the rules of art was derived from reason rather than from ancient authority. Though in the 17th century Sir Thomas Browne, who stood against ancient authority in secular matters, declared that in religion haggard and unreclaimed reason must stoop unto the lure of faith. John Locke, the great philosopher, had opined that there was no war between faith and reason. He declared in an essay concerning human understanding that was published in 1690 that faith is nothing but a firm assent of mind, which if it be regulated as is a duty, cannot be afforded to anything but upon good reason, and so cannot be opposed to it. This was the temper of the 18th century. If it is called the age of reason or the age of sensibility, it is because in this age it was assumed that in reasoning power all men are and have always been equal. It was an age which took a legitimate pride in modern discoveries based upon observation and reason, and which delighted to reflect that those discoveries had confirmed the ancient beliefs that there is an order and harmony in the universe, that it is worked on rational principles, that each created thing has its allowed position and moved in its appointed spheres. It was, in short, an age which implicitly believed in the biblical saying, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. I hope you are well acquainted with the terms the age is divided into very well now. So now let us consider the literary characteristics of this age. In the previous ages which we have dealt with, it were the poetical works which were given prominence. Now for the first time in the history of English literature, prose occupies the front position, as it was the age of social, political, religious and literary controversies in which the prominent writers took an active part, and a large number of pamphlets, journals and magazines were brought out in order to cater to the growing need of the masses who had begun to read and take interest in those controversial matters. Poetry was considered inadequate for such a task, and hence there was a rapid development in prose. In fact, the prose writers of this age excelled the poets in every respect. The graceful and elegant prose of Addison's essays, the terse style of Swift's satires, the artistic perfection of Fielding's novels, the sonorous eloquence of Gibbon's history, and the oratorical style of Burke have no equal in the poetical works of this age. In fact, poetry also had become prosaic, because it was no longer used for lofty and sublime purposes, but like prose, its subject matter had become criticism, satire, controversy, and it was also written in the form of the essay, which was the common literary form. Poetry became polished, witty, and artificial, but it lacked fire, fine feelings, enthusiasm, the poetic glow of Elizabethan age, and the moral earnestness of Puritanism. In fact, it became more interested in the portrayal of actual life and distrusted inspiration and imagination. The chief literary glory of the age was not poetry, but prose, which in the hands of great writers developed into an excellent medium capable of expressing clearly every human interest and emotion. The two main characteristics of the Restoration period, realism and precision, were carried to further perfection during the 18th century. They are found in their excellent form in the poetry of Pope, who perfected the heroic couplet, and in the prose of Addison, who developed it into a clear, precise, and elegant form of expression. The third characteristic of this age was the development of satire as a form of literature, which resulted from the unfortunate union of politics with literature. The Whigs and the Tories, members of two important political parties which were constantly contending to control the government of the country, used and rewarded the writers for satirizing their enemies and undermining their reputation. Moreover, as a satire is concerned mainly with the finding fault with the opponents and is destructive in its intention, it cannot reach the great literary heights. Thus, the literature of the age, which is mainly satirical, cannot be favorably compared with the great literature. One feels that these writers could have done better if they had kept themselves clear of the topical controversies and had devoted their energies to matters of universal import. An other important feature of this age was the origin and development of the novel. This new literary form, which gained great popularity in the succeeding ages and which at present holds the prominent place, was fed and nourished by great masters like Defoe, Richardson, Fielding, Smollett, and others who laid its secure foundations. The realism of the age and the development of an excellent prose style greatly helped in the evolution of the novel during the 18th century. The 18th century was deficient in drama because the old Puritanic prejudice against the theatre continued, and the court also withdrew its patronage. Goldsmith and Sheridan were the only writers who produced plays having literary merit. Another important thing which is to be considered with regard to the 18th century literature is that it was only during the early part of it, the age of Pope, that the classical rules and ideals reigned supreme. In the later part of it, the age of Johnson, cracks began to appear in the edifice of classicism in the form of revolts against its ideals and a revival of the romantic tendency which was characteristic of the Elizabethan period. As the 18th century is a long period, it will be dealt with in different short videos. So far, we have discussed the introduction to the 18th century literature, in which we understood the terms that are assigned to that age: the age of reason, the age of Pope, the age of sensibility, and all these terms that we have discussed. And we have also discussed in this short video the literary trends and currents in this period. In my next video, I shall talk about the age of Pope that is in connection with this video. Till that, stay connected to Lutuf's Literary Club. Happy learning.